Cuckoo for Politics is available on most popular podcast platforms, such as Apple, Spotify, and the Cuckoo for Politics YouTube channel. Hit the like button and subscribe so you won't miss an episode. Past episodes can be found on the website cuckooforpolitics.com. I will add links to those platforms and to my social media accounts, like on Facebook and Instagram, in the show notes below. Feel free to comment on either of those platforms, as I welcome all feedback. Appreciate your support. Take care. This is Michael, host of the political podcast, Cuckoo for Politics. I am so passionate about politics, hence the name Cuckoo for Politics, and I hope you are too. Thanks for joining. This is a podcast discussion on political perspectives on various issues that matter with citizens of the world. So I do ask that you grab your favorite libations, whether it be coffee, tea, water, juice, beer, wine, or a spirit or two, and let's get ready for some lively conversation and let's learn something together. There is power in a union. I'll repeat. There is power in a union. That's actually the title of a book that I recently read by Philip Dre. He talks about the long journey of the American labor movement. Ironically, the first union was created after the Civil War in 1866. It was called the National Labor Union. It was formed, and over time, other industry-specific unions followed. This was the beginning of organized labor as we know it today. Now, as workers were increasingly being exploited by unchecked business practices, federal laws were enacted to protect the worker. Let me give you an example. There was workplace safety regulations, thanks to unions. There were limits on work hours, thanks to unions. There was overtime pay being compensated, thanks to unions. There was child labor laws, thanks to unions. There was various protected leaves, thanks to unions. The family medical leave that many of us enjoy was all orchestrated, pushed by advancement of labor. Whenever labor wins, non-union workers get it too. So let me just focus on a couple of things, because this particular episode is on the subject of unions as well as the airline workers industry, specifically the flight attendants. Let me just break down a couple of things. The National Labor Relations Act took place in 1935. It laid the foundation that protects employees' rights to form unions and engage in collective bargaining. There's also the Railway Labor Act, which was passed in 1926. Now, that covered railroad workers in the beginning, but soon as commercial aviation took place, in 1936, airline workers were covered by those laws. It laid out the structured process for collective bargaining, negotiation, mediation, and arbitration. This was to help labor and management resolve conflicts to minimize disruptions. However, it also provided stipulations and steps for workers to enact in a job action, a strike per se. They cannot do it arbitrarily. Now, here's something else that as another important component in labor relations. That is the National Mediation Board. Think of them as referees in a sporting event. They conduct union elections, mediate disputes, and ensure both sides, the company and labor, play fair. Now, behind every safe flight, there's a whole support team. They're the gate agents. They're the ramp workers. They're the mechanics. They're the catering and cleaning crews. There's so much more. But who are the heart and the face of the airline industry? They're flight attendants. They work 10 to 14 hours a day, sometimes multiple days in a row, with large chunk of that time going unpaid or underpaid. No, pilots too fall under that same category, as they too don't get paid until the plane pushes back. Now, on the recent developments in their contract, they are definitely being fairly compensated. But now it's time for the flight attendant work group. Think about it. The flight attendants, now again, this is all airline workers, but they were subject to the up and down of the economics. There's wars that impacts their jobs. The 9/11 definitely impacted airline travel. Bankruptcies, mergers, economic crashes all hit their paychecks and job security. However, most airlines have hit a series of economic boom right after the pandemic. Business and leisure travel is in an uptick. You cannot get on a plane and look at around and like, where are all these people going? The terminals are packed, and so is the airlines. That's good news for the economy, and that's good news for the airline and its workers. However, with record profits going through the roof, it's time that the face of the airline, the flight attendants, get paid too. There is good news. There has been a tentative agreement reached between the United Airlines flight crews as well as with the airline. And luckily, I have no one better than a person that's been advocating for these advances and changes is Sara Nelson. She is the international president of the Association of Flight Attendants. Sara has been on the front lines of labor organizing since 1996. She led the Fight for Historic Payroll Support program during the pandemic, keeping aviation workers paid and insured while banning stock buybacks and capping executive bonuses. She believes in worker first. America's most powerful flight attendant, that's what she's been named by the New Yorker. In Styles magazine, she is listed as the top 50 badass women list and was profiled in the New Yorker. The fun thing is, she's not stopping there. She is the chair of the International Transport Workers Federation Civil Aviation Section, representing nearly 5 million aviation workers globally. I am so honored to have her on this show, and you, the listener, will be very interesting to hear what she has to say in everything going about the union, the national profile, our strength, and our limitations in today's corporate America. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Cuckoo for Politics. Let's get ready for some lively discussion while learning something together. What's up, good people? Michael here, host of the political podcast, Cuckoo for Politics. Thank you for joining. Thank you for listening. Today, I have the honor of talking with Sara Nelson. As you heard in my bio of her, she is the AFA, Association of Flight Attendants, international president, and it's been great to finally catch up with you. My schedules have always been conflicting. I'm glad we were able to keep in touch, but I want to bring you on to discuss labor relations. In a previous episode I had with another union leader, we talked about labor in limbo, and that was in the beginning of the new administration. My guest talked about the relations labor had in the previous with the Biden administration and now with the Trump administration. At the time of our recording, it was still new, so we were just assessing and being hopeful. Now, we are now coming into July, and we are seeing the transition of the past and the present. Where do you see labor's friend? Do we still have a friend in the labor in the White House?
Well, I mean, let's be really, so I want to be really clear with politics, okay, that we not only operate in a democracy, but it's a democracy with the backdrop of capitalism. And capitalism only thinks about profits. It does not think about people. The only reason that we were able to build up shared prosperity in this country and actually have a social contract that you think about, like if you go to work a full time, you're going to be able to have a living wage. You're going to be able to afford a home to live in. You're going to be able to get health care. You're going to be able to retire someday, and you're going to be able to send your kids to college. And that has really eroded. The only way that that was built up, because unions organized and we got to about 30% density in this country, it is now down to just 6% of the entire private workforce taking on those corporations that actually have unions and union contracts. So that puts a lot on our shoulders to try to battle corporations. That's also why we've seen the steady increase of income inequality, essentially since President Reagan fired the air traffic controllers in 1981, said it was open season on unions. We were about 20% density then, and it has dropped like a rock. As it has dropped, that income inequality has gone up, wages have remained relatively flat across the economy, and productivity has gone through the roof. That means that there's about three jobs that one person is doing today that previously were three jobs. And all of that productivity has gone into the pockets of Wall Street, because what they also did, what President Reagan also did, was make stock buybacks legal. These tools that corporations can use to shovel cash to Wall Street and out of our pockets. And so we have to build back the check on corporate greed in capitalism. And that check is making sure that we have more people who have unions, who have union contracts. So it's not all on our shoulders. On the big issues like healthcare and like retiree healthcare, pensions, retirement security, those things, we're never going to be able to battle those on our own. We're going to have to battle those with a fighting working class. So back to your question about, do we have a friend in the White House today? Let me just say that I can tell you definitively that we got the right to strike back on the table with the Biden administration. And that's how we were able to get American Airlines to put an additional $1 billion into that American contract, and American flight attendants got to a deal last summer. That's how the Alaska agreement was able to be reached. That's how we got the release for the gate gourmet workers who had been in negotiations for 6 years and negotiating under the Railway Labor Act like we do. And they got a release and got an agreement at the end of that 30-day cooling off period, rather than the corporations having to face that strike. And their big issue was fighting for affordable health care for those caterers. So we had that right to strike back on the table with the last administration. We were starting, you saw a lot of strikes. You saw a lot of supportive workers on strike. And today what we're seeing is a reconciliation package, a budget from this White House that not only tears away all the programs for the working class, but also says there's going to be a premium at work. If you're a federal worker, you actually have to pay between 5 and 10% of your wages just in order to have the right to join a union, not even to have a union. And this is paying it to the federal government, not paying it to your union, like through union dues, so that you have money to have attorneys and professional representatives representing you. But this is just to pay to have basic rights like no discrimination clauses, the right to join a union. This is what this White House is doing. So it's really important for people to understand how far this White House has gone in canceling contracts for 1 million workers. Okay, Reagan fired about 10,000 air traffic controllers. This president has canceled contracts for almost 1 million workers, and now says in his budget that if you want to have any rights as a worker, you should pay more to the federal government for those rights, rather than saying, we're all human beings. We should all have the right to fight for our fair share.
So there's a lot to unpack there, and you mentioned a lot. So I had a lot of questions in my head, because you're right. This administration, since its implementation of this past January, it has taken inroads to minimize minute labor rights. And I think he's now telling all federal workers, you're going to convert you to at-will workers. If you're not loyal to the administration, somehow you're going to be eliminated, unemployed. And that's the problem we are facing ourselves.
An essay about what you're going to do to be loyal to Trump, not to be loyal to the federal government and to the American people, but to be loyal to Trump. So I don't say that name very often, and I don't want people to be confused here. AFA is a non-partisan organization. All unions are. But our union, we interface with every party, anyone who's in office. We have to deal with whoever's in office. And I will say I've built up a good relationship with Secretary Duffy, DOT Transportation Secretary. We have to do those things. We have to talk with everyone. But, we are coming at this from a place where there are people in office now who not only maybe will ignore us, which I think is what we have seen actually for the last 40 years. So let's be clear about that, okay? It's not like we've had it rosy as a working class for the last 40 years. But we actually have people who hold us in contempt and are trying to stamp out all of our rights or any hope for having any rights.
Well, you've been successful in working with the past administration, and let's talk about during the pandemic. It was a different corporate climate. There was a similar administration, I guess, Trump tail end, but now into the Biden administration.
It was the same administration. Mitch McConnell ran the Senate, but Nancy Pelosi was Speaker in the House.
Speaker of the House. But see how significant that was. We were, as airline workers, as laborers, were able to work with Congress and our partners in White House to remedy some of the situation that we found ourselves in. And so that's a good example of a good working relationship.
Of our power, and the fact that we set the agenda. But I think it's really important to put that in context. You know, you and I started around the same time. I started in August of '96. I'm coming up on 29 years here.
Yeah. So I am senior, for the record. I am senior to her. Yes. I started in January '95. Yes.
Don't ever let me forget it. Anyway, but you know, it was 5 years after I started that September 11th happened. And I'll tell you what, you know, coming out of the gate, I don't know if you remember the 97 contract or not, the 10-year agreement. I voted no on that. It's actually what started my union career. I was like, we can do better. We should fight for more. We're worth more. I've been saying this my whole career. So, but then, you know, September 11th hit and it changed everything. And not only did it change everything, I know you knew friends personally who were affected, but, you know, every single person on Flight 175, that was a flight that I flew all the time with all of these people at various stages. But with Amy and Michael and Amy and Al and Alicia and Catherine and Robert and the two customer service agents who were on that flight, Marianne and Jesus, you know, we knew everybody really, really well. And I say their names every single day because they were awesome people who any one of us would have wanted to be like. But as we were mourning their death, there were crisis capitalists who were planning to redefine the value of a flight attendant, a pilot, a mechanic, a gate agent, how to outsource more of the work so that they can have low wage work with no benefits, like in the kitchens or the sky caps or, you know, other airport jobs. And that was their plan. And I learned that very, very painfully and personally as I did that AFA work through that 38-month-long United Airlines bankruptcy and learned what capitalism will do if it doesn't have a check of unions. Now, we fought them every way we could, even with a gun to our head in bankruptcy court. And we did better because we fought them. But, you know, then we went into a series of mergers. We've had an abnormal set of negotiations. And by 2019, just before the pandemic, I was out on the picket line with the GM workers who were striking on my way actually to a local council meeting on the West Coast. I stopped and went to the picket line in Texas. And those auto workers out on that picket line had the same complaints we have. They had the same, they maybe used different terms on it, but I started to realize, oh my God, you know, this has been an effort by the corporate class to figure out how across industries they can try to stamp out our rights. They can try to make us work harder for less, longer days, shorter nights. It's the same thing across the board. Tiered employment, getting rid of pensions, getting rid of retiree health care. All of those things were the same things I was hearing on picket lines all over the country. And I realized we're in this together. So when the pandemic hit just a year later, there was no way in hell I was going to allow us to go backward again. Because the pandemic was actually a bigger crisis than 9/11. And if we hadn't stopped the destruction of the airlines would have shut down. They would have furloughed everybody. Many of them probably would have gone into bankruptcy. They would have had another whack at our contracts. They would have come for it too. They would have used that with all their might. And so we put forward the payroll support program that you're very familiar with, and you know that we fought for and won, even in that climate when, you know, Trump was in the White House and Mitch McConnell was running the Senate and Nancy Pelosi was Speaker in the House. But it wasn't about them. It was about the fact that we had the power as labor, because when the CEOs couldn't get the Congress to say that they would just give them money so that they could decide how to use it, they got really frustrated and they asked Peter DeFazio, who was chairman of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee at the time, they said, what do we need to do? And Peter said, you need to talk to labor. And they said, does that mean call Rich Trumka, the president of the AFL-CIO? And Peter DeFazio said, no, call Sara Nelson. She's got the plan that's going to save you. And so they had to call. It took them another 2 days because they're a little arrogant, but it took them another 2 days. But they did finally call. And you know what? They negotiated outside of Congress that they would agree that it would be a payroll pass through, that they wouldn't get the money, that it would have to go straight through to our payroll, that keep us in our jobs, keep us connected to our credentials, keep us getting our contributions to Social Security, to our retirement, to our 401ks, keep us connected to our medical, all of that during the pandemic. That all made a lot of sense. But we also said, you know what? You have to ban stock buybacks because you've been busy funneling cash to Wall Street when the airlines have been making money. And then you're trying to save money to send more to Wall Street by cutting our staffing. That's what was going on. These are the pressures that were created in our economy because labor had grown so weak. So we said ban stock buybacks and dividends and cap your pay. And we were the only industry not to grow in inequality during the pandemic. But that was because we had the power, 80% organized, to say, you're going to have to deal with labor and you're going to have to come to our plan in order to do this. And the one thing they wouldn't agree to, Michael, the one thing they wouldn't agree to was that there would be a restriction from them using any federal dollars to union bust. Delta spent all their time on that rather than on saving the company or saving our jobs.
So, let's see something. Now, when you were talking about how advocating on families and for labor, for a minute there, I thought I was talking to Bernie Sanders. But I was going to say, hey, Bernie. But you have that passion. And I see that workers feel that they have that passion. They feel like they're emboldened when we achieve, when collectively across board. But like you said, there's union busting going on. Currently, the association is working with the Delta flight attendants to get them unionized. I don't know when the vote takes place, but are you seeing also the obstruction being taken place by the corporation to prevent any type of advancement for that work group?
Oh, sure. I mean, Delta is spending money right now lying about the United Tentative Agreement because they want to spread disinformation in AFA and they want to make us, not be able to have good footing to be able to get a union. What I will tell you is the organizing at Delta has been critical in order to make sure the bottom doesn't fall out in our bargaining. Because the fact that the pilots have Delta also to be able to bargain with means that they have one more major contract where they can make improvements. And that means it's easier to lift their careers because they have so much more power there with one more major contract where they can bargain. And don't forget, Delta has been leading the industry for a very long time in the most profits. So they should be paying the most. They should be paying the most for all of their labor, but they're not. They save in all kinds of ways, like not having, a guaranteed trip pay if your trip falls apart, being able to just reassign line holders in any way they see fit, in giving people only 56 hours of sick leave and PTO that they can use each year, not having a sick bank or an OJI bank. They save in all these ways behind the scenes. They cut in healthcare when they give a raise. But because of our organizing, we at least have been able to make sure that the bottom doesn't fall out. So when we're at the table, it was very helpful to force Delta to have to give another raise while we're in bargaining with United. So we're never going to be able to truly get the full value of our careers until Delta flight attendants are also negotiating a contract. But just organizing makes it better for us at the table than it would if we were not doing that at all.
So, I see, and to be clear, organizing is a partnership. It's not coming out of one particular union's group's dues. It's it's a collective, because there's always that notion that why is AFA spending so much money on organizing this work group? I'm sure you hear that.
Oh, well, you know what? That is a collective effort. Absolutely. And not only that, but it is not that much money. If you look at the return on that, we're talking billions of dollars in our pockets because of spending, a small dollar amount on that organizing and supporting Delta flight attendants. They're organizing themselves, right? They're doing that. We're supporting them in doing that. But this is their campaign. And so we have to support them in doing that, but we get a return on that. We're never going to get the full return until they can actually get to that election and negotiate that first contract. That's what we really need in order to lift up our careers. But we stop the bottom from fully falling out, just like we stopped the bottom from falling out by getting the payroll support program and making sure that we weren't going backward. Our contract became amendable when we were still getting 2 more months of payroll support of the payroll support program. So if you think about that, we wouldn't have really wanted to be bargaining a contract at that point because the airlines were still massively losing money. And here we are in this moment now where they're making tons of money. The executives that cap on their compensation ended in March of 22. And what did they do? They paid themselves right away, including Scott Kirby. And they jumped their pay up and then delayed and dragged out negotiations because that's what union busters do. It's the 4 Ds of union busting: divide, delay, distract, and demoralize. And they know how to do this. And they not only plan it with other airlines, they talk to CEOs at all the other industries to figure out how they can try to keep labor costs down, keep union power in check, all of those things. And all of the corporations help. When American flight attendants were asking for a release to strike, who was on the Hill? Our CEO, Scott Kirby, was on the Hill telling them not to give them that right. That's because he didn't want American to set a higher bar that he was going to have to match. And he also didn't want us to have that same right either.
So this is the frustration as a worker. You see, you mentioned about Delta and the organizing and the fact that we are benefiting when they are organizing. It'll be great once they become a union. Pattern bargaining, you're familiar with that? So if one group has this benefit, then the other group has it. No, for so long, airline workers, particularly flight attendants and the pilots, have not been paid when they start work. They show work hours before. They do a lot of prepping. There's a lot of work even when the customer is on the aircraft. And they're still not getting paid until the plane pushes back. That has been going on, and it mirrors the Railway Act. And
actually, it's because we were exempted from the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1948. Yes. So we don't have the same protections that other workers have about wage and hour rules. Those don't apply to us. And so we've had to negotiate that. Well, our contract that we first got in 1946, that was patterned off of the pilot contracts that were based on the flight hours. That makes a lot of sense. You can see how this all made sense at the time, right? And it even made sense up until the bankruptcy, because what we negotiated was the duty rigs, the trip rigs, those things that we still have today, like the 1 for 2 duty rig, the 1 for 3.5 trip rig, the minimum day of the 5 hours. All of those things are protections for us that made sure that we would get our hourly rate more often, because what that started to do was force the corporations to be more productive with our time, right? But what we also had was an 8-hour day. We negotiated an 8-hour day in 1946. And that 8-hour day didn't go away until the United Airlines bankruptcy. And that is in line with what has happened across the rest of the economy. You talk to any worker out there and ask them if they have an 8-hour day or if they have the weekend off, people laugh. Like, it doesn't happen anymore. This is what I'm talking about, that productivity going through the roof. That has been across the economy. And so, Michael, what has happened is since September 11th, this issue of not getting paid for boarding became so much more acute over the last 20 years because we're working longer days, which means what? We're doing more boardings. We're having more sit time. We have more time that's unpaid during our day, which means that we want to get more of that back. So that's why boarding pay became such a clear demand across the industry for flight attendants, specifically for flight attendants, because it's not pilots who have to greet those passengers. We can board a whole airplane, as you know, without even having the pilots
they're hidden
on board,
behind the door,
right?
They're definitely hidden behind the door.
Yeah. So this was a very clear demand across the industry, and because we were organizing at Delta put that boarding pay in place, which was really important for us because that made it possible then to lock that in contracts across the industry. Now, Southwest decided to put it all into their wages and not take the boarding pay. They have more boardings than any of us, actually.
True,
But they decided to do that. But everyone else, Alaska and American, and now in our contract, and now we're starting to see this in the regional contracts that we're bargaining. We're going to make this standard. Boarding is going to be another amount of time that we're going to get paid on top of that hourly rate. And don't forget that hourly rate was negotiated understanding that flight attendants were really only going to get paid about 80 hours in a month, as opposed to somebody who's working a 40-hour work week. If you just talk about a month as 4 weeks, and it's a little longer than that, you're talking about double the amount of time. So our hourly rate on the airplane is intended to be about twice as much as it would be if we were working on the ground. And if we can add other units of time to that, that's a good thing. That's why the boarding pay is at the half rate, by the way. I would always argue for it to be more, but the idea is that you're getting paid like a ground worker while you're on the ground. And that is essentially half of what our flight hours are.
So why not include also the sit time pay? That's another time where workers are sitting there for hours. And for those of you in the airline lingo, that's when a crew member is in between flights from New York to Chicago. And prior to going to Denver, there's a 2-hour or 3-hour sit that they wait at the airport. But that's still unpaid time, but that's duty time. And that goes for every worker. Well, pilots and flight attendants.
So one of the things that, way back, this is, I think it was the late 70s, or it might have been the 1980 contract. We were the first to get day rooms. Of course, you get the day room if you're over 4 hours, right? But part of getting that day room was also to try to incentivize the company not to have long sits, right? So it goes both ways. There's a protection. Delta still today, you only after 6 hours can you ask the company if at their discretion they would like to give you a hotel room. They don't have that. They don't even have that
after 6
protection,
hours?
Okay? After 6 hours, they can ask. Michael.
And not even honored.
And trust me, it's not scheduled. So what do you think the answer is?
Oh, no.
And you know hotels very well. If you don't have a plan to have those hotels, what happens? No hotel rooms. No, it's not possible, right? So anyway, we have negotiated things to try to disincentivize the company to have us on long sits. Another disincentive, of course, is our duty rig. That's the one for every 2 hours on duty. These things will tend to try to make the corporation want to make us more productive. But we do have long sits in our trips, and some people have those. It tends to be in bases where they're doing a lot more one-day trips, and they're saving on the hotel rooms because it's a satellite base or things like that. And getting the boarding pay is one piece of that. It's one part of eking into that sit time, because as you know, the sit time is counted from the time you block in to the time you block out. So if you're getting paid for that boarding time, now you're at least getting paid for part of that time. But we have, because of United structure, it would have been extremely costly based on headcount, and this is so frustrating to talk about. But those are items that are really costly in the contract. And we got more out of United than American. We got $6 billion for a 5-year deal when American paid $4.2 billion for a 5-year deal. So and the company just didn't want to go there, and it's part of negotiations. Doesn't mean our demand goes away. It means we lock in this contract, we get the boarding pay in place, we get our pay much higher, we negotiate from a position of strength, we start the clock on the next negotiations. This is the one good thing about this, is that we'll get that extra pay bump at 4 years, but we get to start negotiations then, which means that actually after 3 years into this contract, we elect our new negotiators. We start our surveys for what we want in the next contract. We have the ability to actually negotiate in those last 12 months the next contract. And that's the way we build up our careers. The reason that it's been so weird over the last 20 years is because of 9/11, then the bankruptcies, then the mergers, by the way, that do not show up under the RLA. Those negotiations are not even mentioned in the RLA. So we didn't even have the basic protections that we normally think of in bargaining during those merger negotiations. So we have to get back to regular bargaining, and back to your pattern bargaining point. Some people would be like, hey, we don't like this pattern bargaining because you're saying that even though we're in total the highest compensation, in total the contract is the industry leader, it doesn't look like it's that much far above our competitors, right? And that is pattern bargaining. We are higher. which sets the bar higher for the next negotiation for the next person who goes in. And that's the idea, that you want to get back to regular negotiations so that that pattern bargaining lifts you higher and higher each time. You're not fighting it out on your own. You're fighting as a whole industry together. And hopefully with the power of Delta flight attendants too, adding to that, just like the pilots. But if you get to that pattern bargaining and you have more regular negotiations, that's what traditionally built up our career, and that's what we have to get back to.
I guess it is frustrating overall because you see the changes. You gave a great analogy in the context. 8 years. I mean, everything changed after 9/11. The corporate mentality changed. The airline changed. And we, on our employee side, saw our contracts being broken up, minimized. And then you had bankruptcy. Then you also had the merger. Then you had the pandemic. Then you see, if you any airline, you walk in, you go into the terminal. Wow, look at the renovations. Look at the new lounges. Look at what the new equipment they're buying. Look at the new planes. Look at the new uniforms. And then you see the shareholders rewarding the CEO an extreme amount of money. And then when you come to negotiations, you see different labor groups getting their piece of the pie. And then you're expecting it because you've been chanting, more, demand, respect us. And then you just get crumbs. And you're like, no, this can't be.
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge the anger, because I feel the anger and rage myself, okay? But what we need to do is we need to focus on what can we do about it. And I would argue with the fact that people would describe this as crumbs, as not crumbs. I would suggest that people go on and look at the calculators, see how this is going to dramatically change your pay, your income, your quality of life. And what we need
just to be fair, the crumbs they're comparing it to, obviously an employee is not the same salary as a CEO or other work groups, but that's why they would define it as crumbs.
So here's the deal though. I mean, we have to negotiate together to get our fair share, right? We're never going to, I think everybody knows we're never going to make what a CEO makes, but we should get our fair share of the profits that we create. So it's really important to recognize we're 20% of the workforce. We're going to make them pay $1.2 billion just between now and the end of the year, just between now and December, when we ratify this agreement. They made $3 billion last year. That's more than 1/3 of the profits when we're 20% of the workforce. So putting it in those terms, if we hand that $1.2 billion over to Scott Kirby, which is frankly what I think he hopes that this goes down. Because that will be another $1.2 billion that he can use in stock buybacks or to increase his pay more. Or, how do you get back at him? You take the damn money and you put it in our pockets and you put us in a stronger position to be able to negotiate more sooner. So that's really what we have to be doing here. If it gets voted down, we know very well what won't happen. We will not get those pay increases. We will not get those retro checks. We will not get started on being a part of the procurement process of getting our hotels. We won't have the hotels at the 17 hours as opposed to 19 hours. We won't get started on all the programming for the reserve wraps. We won't get started on all the improvements that are in this contract. We're going to be waiting on all of that. This is the part we don't know. We don't know how long. Now, I have from experience, it's typically about 6 months before you get back to the table. That's typically what happens. We are not in typical times. So I can't tell you, Michael, for sure when we would get back to the table. What I can tell you is that it's very clear that Scott Kirby didn't want to get this agreement in the first place. And because he's saving a lot of money, but now he's got a great argument. I tried to give him $6 billion. They wouldn't take it, right? So he gets off scot-free, running away with his $33.9 million, which is probably going to go up, because now we will have just saved $1.2 billion between now and the end of the year. And there's no real incentive for them to get back to the table. And that's because of the other thing I think you wanted to ask me about, which is our right to strike, right? How do you call the question? Under the NLRA, Am I on a roll here?
You are. So
under the NLRA.
While you're explaining that, a question that pops into mind as far as striking.
Sure.
We see as airline workers, we demand, we feel like we're in a position that we can force the negotiators, meaning the company, to go back to the table and demand more. But you made a point of like certain events that we don't control, such as geopolitical events. We see there's slow bookings from various countries coming to for business and for leisure travel coming into America. There's a concern, I guess, would say that if we were to go back to the table, like you said, Scott Kirby says, I try to give them money. And now he could say, hey, based on bookings, based on geopolitical events that are reoccurring, the Middle East and so forth like that, he could say the numbers could change. I can't give you that anymore.
That is always possible. And so we, as a general rule, you want to be negotiating in good times. You don't want to be negotiating in bad times. Okay. That's just like the general rule of negotiations, no matter where you are in the negotiating process, whether you voted down a TA or you're just starting negotiations. You just don't want to be negotiating in bad times. You want to be negotiating in good times because it's easier to take the money in good times, right? So, this is on the horizon. We don't know for sure how far this is going to go, how much it's going to impact the airline. We don't know that yet, okay? There's just signs of not great times coming. That's just a fact. And so it could get worse. Yes. Have we seen tentative agreements get worse that got voted down? Yes. Have I seen improvements? Yes. But what I will tell you about this too is that the improvements that I have seen under the Railway Labor Act, when a tentative agreement gets voted down, are marginal, and you don't ever make up for the time value of money that you've lost while you're waiting for the next agreement to go into place. So we're not going to make up for all that $1.2 billion that they owe us. We're not going to make up for that in improvements in a new agreement. Certainly not if times are bad. Then there's actually the possibility of things getting worse. So all of that is true. I mean, people can call that fear-mongering, whatever. I have to give you the facts. I mean, this is proven across history that this is just the case. When you're bargaining, you want to be in good times. You don't want to be in bad times. Okay. So they're going to pocket that $1.2 billion. Who knows how long it takes us to get back to the table? It's up to the government to call us back to the table. They can decide to call us back. They can decide to set us out on ice. Maybe they're like, you were too greedy. we don't think you should have $6 billion.
Wow.
So we're just not going to call you back. And in the meantime, Scott Kirby gets to say, I tried. They rejected it. I tried to give it to them. I don't know what I could do. A 40% increase, that wasn't enough. A retro check of, $20,000, $30,000, even some of the higher ends, $50,000, that wasn't enough. I guess I don't know what to do. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, that is going to be his posture for sure. We know this. And we also know that he has, made friends with everyone in Washington. So we know what we're up against here under the RLA. The government has to call you back to the negotiating table in order to get there. And then in order to advance the negotiations, they also have to control that too. So, looking at all of this, you just have to assess what's the likelihood, what's our ability, what's our power to make a change. Now, when I go talk to other labor groups, there's a lot of ways that we can generate power and leverage, and we will go fight. If that's where we are, of course we're going to fight. I want to tell you, I like our odds better with our money in our pocket and starting the clock on the next negotiations. I like those odds a lot better, Michael.
Yeah.
Because it's proven that when people have more in their pocket, when they have more stability in their lives, when they don't have to pick up that extra trip that month, when they have more time to think and be with their families, that they are better prepared to fight for the next time. And so I want to lock that in. I want to take this money from Scott Kirby and I want to say yes and we are going to continue to mobilize. We are going to continue to fight. We are not going to let you violate our contract because we're going to act like a union, and we're going to get started right now on thinking about the next negotiations. We're going to do it differently. We're going to have strategic bargaining. We're going to be prepared. We're going to have our negotiators who are prepared. We're going to have our proposals prepared. We're going to be targeted in what we're planning to go get. We're going to be very clear in our demands, and we're going to get those negotiations done before we get to that next amendable date. And that is entirely possible. So that's what we need to really, focus on and plan for. And that's my recommendation to everyone based on what I know about my experience over the last 30 years, what I know about negotiations everywhere else, because I do just want to recognize this one thing. This is very frustrating. We work under the RLA. I've had people come up to the roadshows and say, how do we change the RLA? It's the same thing. We have to organize more. We have to have the political power to be able to change the RLA. We don't have that right now. 6% union density in the private sector. We don't have the power to change the RLA to our favor. We could open it up, and guess whose favor would change to? Not ours, okay? We could go to what John McCain wanted in the early 2000s and have baseball-style or arbitration where we get a contract shoved down our throats through an arbitrator rather than negotiating it and voting on it. We don't want that, right? So under the NLRA, which is what the National Labor Relations Act, which is what most workers in the country operate under, negotiate under, those contracts expire. That becomes a strike deadline. The union decides to call a strike or not, and the workers still will authorize that strike or not. But they have a definitive deadline. We do not have a deadline under the Railway Labor Act. As you know, our contracts become amendable. They don't expire. In bad times, that could be a good thing because, as I said, you don't want to be negotiating in bad times, right? So you can just hang on to that contract. In most times, that accrues a benefit to the corporations if we don't lock these things in and start getting to the next negotiations. So all the value of this contract, this is the most expensive contract in our history, not just at United Airlines, but across the entire industry. We need to lock it in and start the clock ticking on the next negotiations, continue to prepare for that. Not say yes to Scott Kirby. Hell no, because he wants us to say no, I promise you. He wants to keep that $1.2 billion in his pocket and have the moral high ground of saying, I tried to give it to him. And that's what he wants to have happen. I know it. And so we have to be, smarter than that. We got to lock this in, lock all that value in, and start the clock on the next negotiations, because that is how we build up our careers. And let me be clear. I'm a United Flight Attendant. Am I 100% happy with this contract? Hell, can I say fuck no?
Okay. Now I got to put a disclaimer on this one.
But, what I do know is that I am confident that if we don't lock this in, he's going to run away with the money to the bank, and we have no certainty going forward. If we do lock it in, we're in a stronger place to keep fighting.
No, and you said it all, and I think you hit the points. I think it's frustrating that we're still governed by these laws that were established in the 30s. And I don't know, like you said, we just need to organize. But how do we have what's frustrating? When you look at European workers, particularly airline workers in Europe, they strike and shut it down, and they get their demands. I think we wish we could do the same thing here. We could shut it down and get the parties involved to talk immediately to resolve these issues. And it doesn't happen here. We're just restricted.
Yep. What I will say also is that the right to strike is under attack around the world. All over the world, corporations are getting legislatures to introduce laws that will diminish that right to strike for those workers. It's under attack everywhere. So we need to stand with those workers too. And we're a part of the International Transport Workers Federation. We coordinate with those unions in Europe and in Asia and in Africa and all over the world, in Australia. And we've got to stand up together to lift up our careers all around the world. And so it's just really about worker power. Like, are we gonna stand up and use that worker power and recognize the leverage that we have? That's the point, is that it's not just about saying no, because no doesn't give you leverage. No just might feel good right now. And I want to acknowledge how good that may feel. Stand out on your back porch, have flight attendant parties, scream no to the rooftop. Get that anger, like acknowledge that anger inside your own heart and say that you're going to use that to be strategic about taking from them. We got to take more from them. And so that's what I really just want people to know, is that a protest vote right now is a really dangerous thing. Because it's not going to give you the satisfaction that you think it might. right? It's going to give Scott Kirby the satisfaction of taking that $1.2 billion just this year alone. And then going forward, who knows how long, right? And so I just really encourage people to understand that it can be an angry yes. It can be a very, very angry yes.
I like to say yes and. I like that. I think that should be a new phrase. Yep. Yes and, because we're coming after other prospects to improve our work life. Yeah.
That's right.
So, hey, thank you, Sara, for joining on this episode of Cuckoo for Politics. You're always welcome to come on another episode. And hey, remember, you're junior to me. That's all I got to say. Just remember you're junior to me. Thank you again, Sara.
All right. I'm junior to you, but we are going to fly together real soon.
We will.
Okay, that sounds good.
If you've been following the podcast, you know I usually end each episode with closing thoughts and look ahead at what's coming next. Recently, some listeners suggested I try putting those reflections in a separate episode, maybe even with a guest, to give takeaways more space. As a content creator and always looking to grow and appreciate your feedback, I'm going to give it a shot. So moving forward, a few days after the main episode drops, you'll see a new segment called The Debrief. This will be a space where I break down some episode's key points, share some extra commentary, and continue the conversation. The first of these will be The Debrief one-on-one with Sara Nelson. Meanwhile, the special series Shift Change continues. In part 2, you want to look out for it. I'll focus on what took place inside the negotiating table, discuss the key players, what each side prioritized, what were the terms exchanged between the union and the company. My guest for this particular episode is Ken Diaz, Master Executive Council President for United Airlines. He serves as the chief negotiator for the union members. You might remember Ken from episode 54, Labor and Limbo, where we explored the challenges unions face under the current administration. He also took part in episode 55, The Trump Effect, where we discuss how politics not only has reshaped not government, but personal relationships as well. All of these episodes are available on your favorite podcast platform or on the cuckooforpolitics.com website. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so and share and hit the like button. This is Michael, host of the political podcast Cuckoo for Politics. Thank you for listening. Until the next episode, stay blessed.